Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today, thank you so much for stopping by. In this video, we'll be cutting and sewing this bustier dress that you can see on your screen. So I used 3 yards of Ankara fabric for this dress. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. So we are going to start by cutting the front. My fabric is folded into 2. The first thing I'll do is to roll out my guideline. So I'm going to roll a straight line at the top part of my fabric, and that line is going to be my chest line. So what I'll do now is to take out 5 inches before I start placing my points. Because this dress is a sleeveless dress, it has a strap. So you're going to determine how deep you want the neckline of your dress to be. So for me, I'm taking out 5 inches before I start placing my points. So 5 inches is how deep I want the neckline to be. So the first point is distance from my shoulder to my bust point, which is 10 inches. The next point is distance from my shoulder to my under bust point, which is 13 inches. The next point is distance from my shoulder to my waist point, which is 16 inches. While the last line is the distance from my shoulder to my upper hip point. So after doing that, I went ahead to roll straight lines across all these points. The next thing I'm doing is taking half of my nipple to nipple measurements plus half an inch. So I'm doing a freehand method. So the half an inch is my joining allowance. So instead of placing 4 inches, which is half of my nipple to nipple measurement, I made it 4.5 inches on the bust line, on the waistline, on the under bust line, and on the upper hip line. On the chest line, I went ahead to add extra 1 inch there. So instead of placing 4.5 inches on the first line, I placed 5.5 inches and I connected like this. So on the center front, I'll be taking half an inch on the bust line, on the under bust line, on the waistline, and on the upper hip line. And then I'm going to connect. On the side front, I'll be taking 1 inch on the 3 lines, as you can see. So after doing that, I'll connect into a straight line. The next thing I'll do is to go down by 1 inch from the bust line, and I'll use the curved part of my roller to connect like this. After doing that, on the chest line, I'm going to be taking 0.75 inches on the center front, and I'll take half an inch on the side front. I'll connect from the bust point like this. So go ahead and blend it in so there is no sharp edge. After doing that, I'm going to place my bust circumference divided by 4 on the chest line. I'll replace the dart and I'll add 1.5 inches for my stitching allowance. On the under bust line, I'll place my under bust circumference divided by 4. I'll replace the dart and I'll add my stitching allowance. On the waistline, I'll place my waist circumference divided by 4. I'll replace the dart and I'll add my stitching allowance. On the upper hip line, I'll place my hip circumference divided by 4. I'll replace the dart and I'll add my stitching allowance. After doing that, I'll connect all the dots. So since I'm doing a freehand method, I went ahead to add half an inch on the chest area, which is going to serve as my stitching allowance, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut. After cutting, guys, this is what I have for the front. The center front is on fold, while we have 2 side fronts. So what you do now is to place your main fabric like this on your lining piece, and you are going to cut out. Okay, if you have interfacing, you can iron to it to strengthen your fabric. So for the back, I'll go ahead and also roll out the shoulder line. After doing that, I'll be taking my zipper allowance of 1.5 inches all the way to the end of the fabric. So after doing that, I'll start taking my points. So I'll repeat the same thing that I did for the front. I'm going to take out 5 inches before I start placing my points. The 5 inches, I'm going to replace it with my strap. So if you want your neckline to be deeper than that, you can do more than 5 inches. So the first point is the distance from my shoulder to my bust point, which is 10 inches. The next point is the distance from my shoulder to my waist point, which is 16 inches. While the last line is the distance from my shoulder to my upper hip plus 1 inch. Okay, after doing that, I'll roll straight lines across and I'll label my lines. The next thing I'll do is to take half of my nipple to nipple measurement plus half an inch. I already explained earlier that the half an inch is going to serve as my stitching allowance. So after doing that on all the lines, I went ahead to connect into a straight line. On the waistline, I'll be taking half an inch on both sides. I'll connect to the bust point and I'll connect to the upper hip point like this. The next thing I'll do is to start placing my measurements. On the chest line, I'll place my bust circumference divided by 4 and I'll add my stitching allowance. On the waistline, I'll place my waist circumference divided by 4. I'll replace the dart and I'll add my stitching allowance. On the upper hip line, I'll place my hip circumference divided by 4 and I'll add my stitching allowance of 1.5 inches. After doing that, I'll connect the dots together like this. I'll go ahead and add half an inch sewing allowance to the neckline area. After doing that, I'll adjust the zipper area. So I'll extend the waistline into the zipper allowance like this, and I'll take out half an inch from the waistline. Doing this is going to help your zip sit well at the back. I'll connect to the bust line and I'll connect to the upper hip line like this. So I took out half an inch from the waistline, the zipper allowance on the waistline. I'm going to open up my dart as you can see me doing. So after cutting, this is what I have. Go ahead and notch your zipper allowance, okay? So I'm going to place this on my lining piece and I'll go ahead and cut. So notch the base of your fabric so you don't mix things up, okay? So after doing that, you're going to cut with your lining piece. So for the front, I went ahead to use the main fabric to cut out the lining piece. So I'm going to open them up and arrange them in place. So if you have interfacing, you can iron your interfacing to your fabric, and if you want to pad your fabric, you can go ahead and pad it, okay? So I'm going to place the lining as you can see me doing, and I'll head over to my sewing machine to sew using the half an inch allowance that I left. I'll also arrange the main fabric and I'll head over to my sewing machine to sew. So when sewing, make sure you are following the shape on the fabric, okay? So for the back, I've also gone ahead to cut using my lining piece. I have 2 center fronts and 2 side fronts, and I have the same thing for the lining piece. So I'm going to arrange them in place like this, and I'll do the same thing for the main fabric. After doing that, I'll head over to my sewing machine to stitch them together using half an inch. So the next thing we'll do is to cut out the strap for the dress. So what you took out is what you are going to replace. So the wideness of the strap is 2 inches, but I'm going to make it slimmer when sewing. So after sewing, I'll cut off the excess fabric. So for the length, if you took out 5 inches, you're going to times the 5 inches by 2, meaning 5 inches for the front and 5 inches for the back, and then you add extra allowance for stitching allowance. So that is how you are going to cut out your strap. So if it's 8 inches you took out before you started placing your point, you are going to times the 8 inches by 2 and you add at least 1.5 inches allowance to it, okay? So you're going to cut out altogether 12 pieces for the strap. So the 12 pieces, after cutting, you're going to sew and turn everything inside out. You're going to stitch them 3 together, just like this, okay? And you're going to braid it. You can make it a loose braid or a tight one depending on what you want as your strap. So I went ahead to stitch 3 together and I'm going to braid it out. I already did the same thing for the other 3. So after braiding the strap, this is what I have, okay? So we have 2 straps for one side. I've also gone ahead to stitch the front piece in place, and this is what I have. So once you sew, go ahead and open up your darts and iron it in place. I did the same thing for my lining piece. So the next thing I'll do now is to place my strap. I'll place one of it on the dart line. That is where I joined, and I'm going to go out by about 1 inch from the first one and I'll place the second one. Okay, so after doing that, I'm going to place my lining piece on it and I'll pin all the way around. After pinning, I'll head over to my sewing machine to sew from the neckline to the sides, and then I'm going to turn to the right side and I'll give it a good press. I've also gone ahead to sew the back in place, so I did the same thing for the lining piece. So what I'll do is to place them right side facing right side, and I'll sew on all sides except the base. I'll be turning everything inside out through the base. So after sewing the front, piece the lining and the strap together. This is what I have. So the next thing I'll do now is to fix my zipper to the back. So you fix your zipper and you leave some part of the zipper on the base, okay? So after fixing the zipper, this is what I have. So I'm going to stitch both front and back piece together. I've already gone ahead to pin them together. So for the strap, I want it to be adjustable. That is why I did not stitch it inside the lining of the back piece. So what I'll do is to bring it like this, and I'm going to place it at the back, and I'll use my pins to hold it down, okay? After pinning, I'll head over to my sewing machine to stitch them down, okay? And then I'm going to sew on the side using my stitching allowance, okay? So after sewing, I'm going to turn my dress to the right side. So I'm done sewing the sides and the strap in place, and this is what it looked like. So on the base, I didn't finish sewing my zipper allowance. I left opening there, okay? So after adding the gathers, I'm going to extend my zipper allowance into the gathers so it's easy for me to wear my dress. So this is the fabric I'll be using for the gathers. So to know the length of the fabric, you take out your half length, okay, and then you're going to extend it. So the length of my dress is 38 inches, okay. The upper part is 20 inches while the lower part is 18 inches, okay. So the amount of fabric I have here is about 3.5 yards. So what you do is to measure around the upper hip. Whatever you have, you can times it by 2, by 3, depending on how full you want it to be. So I went ahead to gather the fabric, okay. So measure around the upper hip. Whatever you have there is what you use to gather your fabric so it fits into what you have, okay. So I'll place my tape around the upper hip line, okay, and I'll measure. What I have is about 16.5 inches, so you're going to times it by 2. That is for the front and for the back, and you gather your fabric to fit into it. So after doing that, now I'm going to start pinning the gathers to the main bodice, okay. So I'll start from one end of the back. Open up your zipper allowance. Like I said, I didn't sew all the way to the end, so I'm going to sew all the way around. I'll finish up the zipper, okay. So after sewing the gathers to the main bodice, this is what I have. The last thing you do is to hem the base of your dress, and that is all for this tutorial. I hope it was helpful. Don't forget to like this video. Leave your questions in the comment section. I'll see you in the next one.